Welcome to A Journey Through NYC Religions Television. I'm Tony Carnes, your host. Today we have Karl Haendel, an artist who has portrayed the city, all of its religions, its diversity of religions, and diversity of people, and throughout the whole city, in a new art show on 26th Street in Chelsea. We'll give you some more details about the show later. It's really rather magnificent. Karl, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
I noticed that you did one drawing, and these drawings are large, I think about 9 feet tall or something like that. You did a drawing of the hands of Imam Soleimani Konote, who is at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Harlem. Can you tell us a little bit how you came to pick him, and what did you do in order to do your drawings?
Well, first, thank you for having me on your show. And I should say to any of your listeners that without you, this show might not have happened, because you were one of the first people I got in contact with, because you're a specialist in sort of New York City, the diversity of New York City religions. And I read your book, and you helped me put me into contact with a few people who then were helpful and put me in contact with other people. So really, your help was invaluable, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. I mean, and when you told me about the project, I was so excited. I thought, wow, this is really incredible. So go on.
Yeah. So I don't remember if you put me in touch with Imam Konate, but most of the people that I represented, I think there were 17 in total, were relatively, I'd say, like forward facing, in that they were people who didn't shy away from, if a reporter came to talk to them, they were willing to talk. They might be people who teach, or who maybe would be on panels discussing religious diversity, or interfaith kind of panels or groups. So most of the people I was able to find info about them online, because it's not the interfaith community, although has a lot of people, is not that big. Then I think de Blasio had a religious sort of panel, or a group of religious leaders from across the city. I mean, it was more Brooklyn and Manhattan, so those people were people who I reached out to. So, and then I just did research and found people who seemed interesting, who had beliefs that I thought aligned with beliefs, in terms of acceptance, progressive, tolerant religious leaders. And that's how I found Imam Konate, because he, I think he worked with the New York City Police Department as kind of, after 9/11, some of the Muslim religious leaders made sort of an effort, probably, unfortunately, because they had to sort of reach out to the police and to New York City and say, we're welcoming, we're friendly. So I think he might have been involved in that. And I went up there to the mosque, met a couple people. And the process of making the portrait starts with me taking photographs of everyone's hand. And that just with a digital camera, it's not a big photo shoot. And then I take those photos and I bring them back to my studio here in LA, where I am now, and I play around with them in Photoshop and create a kind of composition that maybe has some relationship to religious imagery that we might know from art history. If you go to the Met, you'll see hands doing, kind of Christian hands. You'll see certain things, or Buddhist or Hindu hands, the mudras. So I'll create a composition that might reference some of those things. Particularly, I'll ask the religious leader, is there something you do in prayer or in a service with your hands? And I'll use that as the basis to create a new composition, which is kind of the one of the Imam. It's impossible. His hand is holding itself. So all of the compositions kind of are a little otherworldly, or a little surreal, or a little ambiguous, a little mystical. in an attempt to create a composition that you haven't seen before.
Well, let's take a look at his hands. You have sort of a hand holding the hand. Is it the same hand or done twice, or is it two hands, two different hands?
Same hand done twice. So I took the picture of his hands doing a few different motions, and then I interwove them through. First, I used the computer to sketch it out, and then I draw it. So it's the same hand.
Now, when you go from the computer to drawing, do you project what you have in the computer in order to outline the hand, or what do you do? Because it's the detail is, and the realism, it's interesting. It's very realistic, but very otherworldly, like you said. What a remarkable combination for very modern, but very traditional in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, I do use I kind of do it backwards in like an old school traditional way of making art. Maybe you might start with a sketch and end up with, I don't know, some bronze sculpture or something, or marble, we think some antiquity kind of thing. But I start with digital cameras, and then I go into Photoshop and play around with it. And it's just, for me, a 21st century artist, the digital is very native and easy to use. But I understand that when you make something, when you draw something and take the time to really, for me to take my labor and really put it towards something like that, it makes it more unique and more special, and have a kind of presence that you wouldn't have if it was just a big photo printed out. So that is why I do the drawing, and I could sort of take my time and labor and honor these people there, all the, the intellectual and sort of emotional and spiritual labor they've given their community. I could honor it. But also the idea of doing a realist drawing of something that can't exist in real life, meaning you can't hold your own hand. I mean, you can do this, but your one hand can't hold itself. But to create a realist drawing of something that does not exist, to me, is a very 21st century or contemporary idea. And that leaves it that kind of surreal, ambiguous feeling.
It's a surreal or ambiguous as to its reality or to its meaning?
Both.
Both. Okay. Well, here, the hand holding each other, you have two fingers going up, it looks like, two or three, and they're held by the same hand going up, and then there's sort of the same two fingers going up at the top. How did you arrive to do it that way? What is significant or signifying by this interweaving of the hand, and then with the two fingers in the palm and then two fingers at the top?
I don't think in some of the way that I do the photo shoots with everyone, we'll start by looking at some images, some religious imagery across culture and time periods of hands. So we might look at a bronze Buddha, we might look at a Byzantine mosaic, and just see some of the kind of all these different types of ways that hands have been represented. And then I'll ask, when you are doing a service or praying, what do you do? So, like in Islam, there'll be you'll have the one finger a lot, but then a particular leader might like to do something with his or her hands just when they're praying, or maybe many Muslims will use beads when they're counting their prayers, or they might do this to make sure they're making this, they'll count their fingers and use the quadrants. So every person has their own particular thing that they might like to do, and different ways that they feel comfortable holding their hands. So with the imam here, it wasn't that particular position had any particular signification, because I want to avoid that very much one-to-one thing where like this means that. It was more like I liked the idea of his hand holding itself, offering a kind of comfort or embracing itself. And to me, that idea of making this large totemic drawing, but also one that was showing comfort and holding and hugging. It was sort of his hand is hugging itself. And I thought that the notion of hugging or warmth or embrace or security or calmness that suggests, I like that. So I just try out a lot of different compositions and just try to come up with something new that maybe feels like it reflects something of the person that I met.
He's African, also African American, who is from Africa.
Yeah, I mean, he's from West Africa and he speaks French, and a lot of the community in Harlem, there's a lot of West African Muslims.
Yeah, we've actually done a story on his mosque.
Mhm.
But it's really very good to see him. And you also own Iman Latif, who is sort of the downtown
Mhm.
Muslim Iman in New York University. You have the beads doing sort of a figure eight
Yeah.
over hands. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And how did you find working with Iman Latif?
I thought, I mean, he's a wonderful guy, and everyone was really generous with their time. And we met in it because it was during COVID, so he wasn't. I met him at his house, and his son was there doing Zoom school while we met. And I mean, everyone was nice. They opened their homes to me, and what was interesting about that one was I did a couple different versions, and one he really liked doing the one God. So I had a different smaller version that I tried out with that. But what I liked about the beads was he used the beads as a kind of meditative prayer, like so that was something personal to him. And I digitally turned those beads into a figure eight because I kind of like that idea of a holistic the infinity sign or the figure eight as
Yeah, I thought that was brilliant touch there. Very subtle, but
yeah. But you're familiar probably with beads that either rosary or beads that Muslims use. They're not that short. They're much longer.
that's right.
So I cut out a whole bunch of beads to make a tight figure eight in the composition because I thought that was I liked the metaphor.
Now, was he wearing the ring that you drew on there?
Yeah. It looks like he's been wearing that ring a while because it looks pretty tight on his finger.
I don't know if he can get it off. Now, you yourself were born in New York?
Yes.
And how long did you live here?
Well, I moved out here in 2000, and I grew up in Long Island mostly. So, and then I lived in Brooklyn for a little bit, and then I moved out here to go to grad school in 2000.
And your interest in the city comes from growing up in the city, or coming back and visiting and just seeing the diversity and color of the city?
I mean, I've always felt my disposition. I mean, if I could afford it, I would live in New York. It's more expensive than Los Angeles. I just feel the most at home there. And the idea for this show came about probably back when I notice it whenever I go to a city because I travel a lot and I walk around different cities where I see like a storefront church pop up or a temple or a mosque. And just when you're I'm always really aware when I'm walking through the streets of the city, particularly if you go to the non sort of fancy areas, if you go to the areas where people live, where recent immigrants come, you see all these different churches and they just sprout up everywhere. And I knew that was the case in New York. And when I would, since I have a gallery in New York and I've always show a lot of art in New York, I'm there and I have family in New York. So I'm always there a few times a year. So it's something I've always been aware of, just walking through different neighborhoods, seeing the different religious communities. And it made sense to do the show in New York at the gallery in New York City, like sort of my interests and the fact that I was having a show in New York aligned. And New Yorkers, there's nothing New Yorkers love more than themselves. So you can always do a show about New York and people will like it. Because everyone thinks you're the center of the world.
Well, we okay. I think that's a fair estimation. We obviously do it through our art too. But had you always been interested in religion, or are you religious yourself, or is this something new that you just saw and you were curious about?
I'm not. Let's see. I'm not that religious. I'm Jewish, and I do some of the rituals, like my daughter and I lit the candles on Friday, and we'll have a small Seder, but I'm not very religious. I was bar mitzvahed. But I think that the interest, my first major in college was religious studies. And that was not in a divinity school sense, more in a comparative religion sense. And I think I've always been interested in, I don't know why, just why people believe what they believe, how they come to believe what they believe, and what, I don't know, what faith does for you, for a community. I ended up studying semiotics after religious studies, which is not as far a shift as one would think, but I've just always been interested in religion. And I have also noticed there is a bias in my community, in like the progressive arts community, against religion. That is, people will, you'll see within the circles I move in, everyone will outdo themselves to be as accepting as possible with any culture, sexual orientation. Please, we welcome all, we welcome all. Oh, you believe, oh, and then you have that. So it's, everything is welcoming until you bring up faith.
And how do you overcome that? Or is this show about a little bit about overcoming that barrier, to open people's eyes to a new experience around them? Or how do you handle that pushback? Because yes, you're right. You'll get very strange thing. I noticed you went to Reverend Simpson, Emma Jordan Simpson's church. You have her hands. And I remember talking to a young producer from CNN who lived nearby. And I said, there are really all sorts of, he says, well, you know, New York's not religious. And I said, well, there are all sorts of religions. I know where you live. And right next to us, there's this huge church, Concord Baptist Church. I said, you ought to go over there and see what they're doing. He said, oh, are you kidding? And I thought, it was like it was Manhattan back and forth to his place, and it wasn't like he was a journalist, but he wasn't particularly curious about it. And I thought, well, what can I say to him? How would you recommend me to talk to him?
I don't have any advice, because I found that in the reaction to the show, people are coming to the show who are not some people are coming to the show who are finding out about it not through art, you know, New Yorkers who maybe are connected, because a lot of the people who I drew, their friends came, they came, and people are finding out about the show and they're really interested. But the art world people are a little standoffish to the show. And I think it's something I've always lived in cosmopolitan urban places where you have people from all over the world. And among probably more like the educated, often white, more upper class people in the city, there's and very supposedly very progressive and liberal. Like these are all democratic places, at least in the US. And if you're in Europe, they're progressive cities. There is just a kind of, you know, where we left that. It's almost like we're not religious. And I think that there is a notion of, people have this idea that religion by nature is conservative, is reactionary, and that's not true. There's, as you know, and that
opinion of the people that you show in your show wouldn't fit that.
No, no, like they're, I mean, as far as I know, they're all quite progressive. But I understand this bias, because a lot of people, let's say in New York, we'll talk specifically about New York City and the arts. There are people in dance and theater and writing and art, and they left maybe the middle of the country or the certain upbringing because their particular belief system or their gender or their politics didn't align with the place they came from. And they want to shed that and come to New York and be a poet, a dancer, a playwright. And they get, and religion might signify all of the sort of the way they weren't accepted in the past. But I think that when I'm interested, one of the things I'm interested in doing in the show was to say that, you know, right around the corner from you is this church and you think that they don't accept you, but you notice how many rainbow flags are hanging in the city, and a lot of them are hanging in front of churches. Like they're like these are not, they're in New York City. They're diverse, accepting places.
Yeah. Maybe they didn't put two and two together, really.
No, but I understand it. But I was trying to maybe make people a little more aware and
Now, when you went by Rabbi Timoner's, did you go to her synagogue, or did you go to her place to do your photograph? Did you visit?
I met her in the synagogue.
That's-
Was at Congregation Beth Elohim in Park Slope, and actually we went to her house too because she wanted to. We photographed over there at her house after we.
Now it's interesting, and we can see the photograph here that she has wrapped a tefillin around her hand. Yes, and how did that come about? Was that her idea, or did you suggest that?
She
have an unusual grasping,
yeah,
like this. It's quite interesting. How did the tefillin come into the picture?
Well, it's really wonderful. So, I mean, I met her there, and she told me. I also ask everyone about how they came to that particular house of worship, because each of these houses, like I wanted to draw people who had houses of worship within the 5 boroughs, specifically like we're a leader of a place, so that if one were to walk around in Park Slope, you might wonder, what is this place? And now you'll be like, oh, I passed by that, or wherever it is, I did a couple places that were near the gallery in Chelsea, because I wanted the people who go to art galleries to be like, oh, I pass that church all the time. Mm-hmm. So with the rabbi, we talked about different poses, and the tefillin is something that actually, I have this painting here. I can tell you the story of this painting, but this is something that my grandma left me when she died.
Oh my God.
It's not a particularly great painting, but my grandfather got that in Hungary. He went back after the war and he got that. But what it is, the tefillin is a leather strap that has a little box on it that has a piece of the Torah. Mm-hmm. And it's a ritualistic prayer instrument that observant Orthodox Jewish men, historically Jewish men, would wrap around their hands. And what you'll see here in this painting is either, I don't know if it's the father or a rabbi, but showing the boy, probably around 13, like, this is how you pray, this is how you observe. Mm-hmm. So Rabbi Rachel is a feminist. She's out as a lesbian now for, like, I don't know, 25, 30 years. You can see, I don't know if you can see that, but on another draft of the drawing, you could see she's wearing she has a pride tattoo, because I visited her during Pride Month. Mm-hmm. And for her, it was important to pose with the tefillin, because historically only men would be wearing this, and historically there wouldn't be any female rabbis. But for me, in fact, she's the only rabbi in this particular show, and I wanted to have a female rabbi because I want to make sure that that people know that you can be religious or involved in religion and be a feminist, can be progressive. Religion by nature does not need to be sexist.
And what's interesting, of course, the tefillin represents that the God should be in your hands, your work, and then, of course, they would also put a box around in your mind. So it's sort of like, let God guide you in all the things you think and do, and so appropriate for a portrait of hands. Mm-hmm. You also drew. There's so many wonderful things that people should go see. These are things just to look and relate to.
You should say that the show is at Mitchell Innes and Nash Gallery in Chelsea on 26th Street, 10th Avenue and 26th Street. It's open to the public. It's free. A lot of art galleries there. It's open 10 to 6, Tuesday through Saturday.
That's right. And we'll put that will be we'll run that on our website or where you can go. It's at 534 West 26th Street. And while you go, you can see not only this show, which is one of the jewels on the street, but right across it's Goldworthy has one of his shows, the environmental sculptor, and you can actually make a visit. A lot of things going on, but this one is really unique, and certainly unique to New York. You also draw Reverend Joe Holland, who is a pastor in Harlem.
Mhm.
And there you have him hands sort of dancing. I don't know if I can do it right. It's sort of like this.
Mhm.
No, not quite right. We'll show you. Let's show it right on the screen here. How did you arrive at that pose that you have, or art?
Well, you'll see in this particular pose, this one is a lot of people's favorites, and it really came out nice. The hand behind, which appears to be holding, again, it's a little bit of a holding itself image, but it's spread out. So there's not 10 fingers in this particular image, if you see.
Yes.
I believe we're down a finger or two. But that comes from the show is called Praise New York, and the hands of praise, which you'll find this kind of motion in different religions. You Jews might do it like this. You might see a Jewish rabbi do this, or in Christianity, they might do this. So I took a picture of his hand coming up, and I was just thinking of how do I represent this praise hand in a novel way, and that's how I got that composition. So you can see that this is not a photo because of the absence of the right amount of fingers.
Sure. And you also did one of Father Enrique Salvo, who's a priest from Nicaragua. And there you have, as you see here, it's sort of two fists over each other. What happened there?
Well,
striking, by the way.
That was, I believe he's holding the communion wafer in one of the hands. And we,
yeah, we've got to, we're going to have to wind up. I'm so excited to hear about you talking about this, but thank you for joining us. I'm Tony Carnes, your host for A Journey Through NYC Religions with Karl Haendel, an artist who has a show going on at Chelsea. Be sure to go see it. Thank you.